Hello, you are watching Shalom World News. I'm Marina Grosu from Washington, D.C. Here are the latest headlines from around the world. April 11th was the 60th anniversary of the encyclical Pacem in Terris of Pope St. John XXIII. At the Wednesday general audience, Pope Francis said the encyclical remains an active statement of the yearning for world peace, especially with the world currently experiencing over 40 active wars and conflicts, including the Russia-Ukraine war. Pope Francis reminded the pilgrims and faithful that Pacem in Terris was the 8th and final encyclical of Pope St. John XXIII, written to the Church and to the world at the time of greatest tension between the opposing blocs during the Cold War. The Holy Father remarked that the encyclical was a true blessing, like a glimpse of serenity in the midst of heavy clouds. At least 52,250 persons in Nigeria have been slaughtered over the past 14 years for being Christians, reveals a recent report released on April 10th. The International Society for Civil Liberties and Rule of Law, headquartered in eastern Nigeria, produced the report titled Martyred Christians in Nigeria. It says 30,250 of those deaths occurred after President Muhammadu Buhari took office in 2015. The study attributes these deaths to what it terms Buhari's hardline Islamism. Within the time frame, about 34,000 moderate Muslims were also butchered or hacked to death. The research shows that 1,041 defenseless Christians were killed in the first 100 days, from January 1st to April 10th this year. At least 707 Christians were taken hostage during the same period. The study highlights that 18,000 Christian churches and 2,200 Christian schools were destroyed when Buhari was in power. Several Republican members of U.S. Congress are seeking answers from the Pentagon after a military medical facility in Bethesda, Maryland, sent a cease and desist letter to Franciscan priests to stop providing pastoral care during Holy Week. 24 lawmakers have criticized the move of the Walter Reed National Military Medical Center as a violation of the First Amendment. The medical center did not renew the 20-year-old contract with the priests and instead gave the contract to a secular defense contractor. The lawmakers wrote a letter to Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin slamming the Biden administration's attack on the Christian faith. Members of Congress also hailed the Franciscan priests who stood alongside service members through the darkest days of the nation's history. Slamming the attack on the Christian faith during Holy Week as unconscionable, the members of Congress sought answers by April 21st. Archbishop Timothy Broglio, who is president of the U.S. Bishops and also Archbishop for the Military Services, said that in giving a contract to the lowest bidder, overlooked the fact that the bidder cannot provide the necessary service. Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky has urged world leaders to take action after learning that a widely shared video shows the beheaded bodies of 2 Ukrainian soldiers. They are seen lying on the ground near a destroyed military vehicle. The commentator says that someone approached them and chopped off their heads. Another video shows a member of the Russian military allegedly using a knife to sever the head of a Ukrainian soldier. President Zelensky has urged the international community to denounce the video. On Wednesday, the Ombudsman for Ukraine announced that he would ask the UN Human Rights Committee to look into the footage. In a Telegram message, Ukrainian Parliament Commissioner for Human Rights, Dmytro Lubinets, stated that a public execution of a captive is yet another indication of a breach of the Geneva Convention's norms, international humanitarian law, and a breach of the fundamental right to life. The number of legal abortions in the U.S. has fallen by 6% in the first 6 months after the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. The data comes after a report by the pro-abortion group Society of Family Planning. The study reflects data gathered from about 80% of all abortion providers in the United States. The average number of abortions per month fell from 82,270 2 months before the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade last year to 77,073 in the 6 months that followed. This represents a drop in abortions of roughly 5,377 per month, or 32,260 fewer abortions in 6 months. Despite monthly fluctuations, there were fewer abortions every month after the Supreme Court's ruling than in April 2022. Abortion rates also fell sharply in states that outlawed or severely restricted most abortions. In what seems to be the latest in a series of persecution of the Catholic Church in Nicaragua, the Daniel Ortega regime seized a monastery belonging to a congregation of cloistered nuns. On April 11th, the Trappist nuns of Nicaragua, who had served the country for 22 years, said that the government had verbally notified the Bishop of Huilapa that the regime was taking over the monastery. As a result, the monastery in San Pedro de Lovago of the Diocese of Huilapa will now be converted to a Nicaraguan Institute of Agricultural Technology. Separately, the government detained at least 20 Nicaraguans during Holy Week, when the dictatorship forbade processions and public religious festivities. The arrests are reportedly linked to processions or public activities of the Catholic Church during Holy Week. Ultraviolet photography of a 3rd century manuscript of the Gospel of Matthew, kept in the Vatican Library, has revealed lines that were erased. Medieval historian Gregory Kessel of the Austrian Academy of Sciences made this fascinating discovery, and the missing lines were retraced in chapters 11 through 12. Erasing and rewriting the same manuscript was a common practice because of the acute scarcity of manuscript paper. While the first verse in chapter 12 of the Gospel of Matthew reads, "At that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath, and his disciples became hungry and began to pick the heads of grain and eat." The erased line reads, "At that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath, and his disciples became hungry and began to pick the heads of grain, rub them in their hands, and eat them." U.S. Republican lawmakers and a coalition of pro-life advocates have urged the federal appeals court to uphold the injunction over the abortion drug mifepristone, decided by a Texas judge last week. A group of 69 Republican lawmakers further said that the Food and Drug Administration violated public policy interests by approving the drug in 2000. Meanwhile, the Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine has urged the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit in Louisiana to uphold the lower court's suspension of mifepristone. The plaintiffs claim that the Food and Drug Administration was negligent in considering all the hazards associated with the drug. The pro-lifers' calls for action came after the Department of Justice pleaded with the appeals court to postpone Texas District Judge Matthew Cook-Marrick's April 7th ruling nullifying the agency's approval of mifepristone. The number of migrant deaths in the central Mediterranean during the first 3 months of 2023 reached its highest level in 6 years, with 441 migrant deaths, according to a recent United Nations International Organization for Migration report. The UN officials decried the rising migrant crises in the Mediterranean. Thousands of migrants from North Africa attempt to reach Europe using overcrowded boats and dinghies. The officials further sought the help of the state officials in the rescue operations of migrants when their vessels capsize, as many deaths are caused by delayed rescue efforts. Pope Francis issued a new motu proprio on Wednesday that makes significant amendments to the penal code and the judicial system of Vatican City. The changes will take effect today. The Holy Father changed a rule governing the Vatican's judicial system, undoing some of his earlier changes to the courts in Vatican City. The traditional need for a full-time Vatican magistrate has been removed by the motu proprio of April 12th, allowing all members of the court to hold additional positions. It also states that the president of the Vatican Court of Cassation shall no longer be the de facto president of the Supreme Tribunal of the Apostolic Signatura, the Curia's highest canonical appeals court. The new modifications mark the third motu proprio the Holy Father has issued to revise the penal code pertaining to his 2020 overhaul of the justice system in Vatican City. U.S. Governor John Bel Edwards of Louisiana has urged lawmakers of the state to end the death penalty in the upcoming legislative session. He said the death penalty was inconsistent with Louisiana's pro-life values and that it promotes a culture of death. The governor said it does not deter crime and is not necessary for public safety. According to the Death Penalty Information Center, there are 62 inmates on death row, and there have been 28 executions since 1976. Since 1973, as many as 11 inmates were freed. The governor also urged lawmakers to legalize abortions for pregnant women who are victims of rape or incest. The pro-life law passed last year only allows abortions when there is a substantial risk of death or impairment to the pregnant woman or if the child has a fatal anomaly. Assailants shot to death 9 people in northern Ecuador in an attack authorities blamed on organized crime gangs. Unidentified armed men killed 9 people working at Ecuador's Esmeralda fishing port on April 11th. It is the latest attack amid an increase in violent crime in Latin American nation. The heavily armed assailants arrived by land and sea and appeared to randomly open fire on workers. According to Interior Minister Juan Zapata, the shooting was carried out by 30 persons, and it was connected to a territorial dispute between gangs. At least 180 shots were fired during the incident, according to the police. The port is strategically significant to drug traffickers as it borders Colombia and Peru, the largest drug producers. On Wednesday, UN Chief Antonio Guterres reiterated the organization's dedication to helping Somalia as it moves forward in achieving long-term peace and stability. At a press conference in the country's capital, Mogadishu, the UN had called for greater cooperation to advance human rights and peace and security so that all Somalis can have a better future. The Secretary General met with President Hassan Sheikh Mohammed and members of his cabinet and visited internally displaced families. He also had meetings with civil society organizations and the heads of UN programs. The UN chief said despite severe challenges, the people of Somalia continue to show enormous strength and resilience. And those are your latest headlines. Join us again tomorrow for more. You can also visit swnews.org for more updates. Shalom.